Hi everyone. Thank you for joining on AppScan Tuesdays today. I hope you all remember to vote, and if you didn't, you can hang up now, go and vote, come back later, see the recording. But if you haven't, if you have already, great. We have a great session for you today. Cody Travis from our AppScan Tech Advisors team joined the show, and it's the second time, if you remember, and I will probably link your video at the end here. The previous time you came in and showed us how to do advanced login, as far as I recall. We were
That's
showing
right.
that, and that was even when we were doing these sessions live. Today we are recording. We got spoiled. But this session I think is even more interesting because it's really new what you're going to show to us. New capability that you basically developed based on our APIs. So
Yep.
let's start with just an explanation. What is this about?
Based on feedback from a number of customers and just the need of a few key customers, we developed a integration with GitHub to manage users inside of ASoC. And what that means is that instead of having to invite all of your developers and grant them access to ASoC one at a time, or in bulk trying to figure out which asset group they belong to, which applications they should have visibility into, just let GitHub manage all of that, and whoever commits code to a repo that you care about, use that data to first invite them to ASoC, and then to grant them access to an asset group or application that they should have visibility to, based on how frequently they commit code.
Yeah, and I think the point here is that, and 2 weeks ago when I spoke with Vladimir from IGT, when we are talking about automation and application security testing program and running it, it's more than just running scans. It's more than even just fixing the issues that are found. It's all about running the program. If you have 1,000 users, if you have 20,000 users, you don't want to do manual step on inviting them. Same for creating of applications. And a few of the customers that you are working with, the enterprise, the really large enterprise customers, had that requirement, and basically use the REST APIs on your own, right, to build this, like anyone else can. But we want to show them how it was done.
Yeah, just to get users started on the idea, I showed them the concept I came up with, how to implement it, the example API calls, what libraries did I use, just to give an example of how it works.
Cool. So let's jump right through it. I think you will start with a few slides to explain the logic behind it, right?
That is correct. So let me share my screen. So I have a few slides just to demonstrate the challenges I faced, the goals I wanted to accomplish, and how the workflow works. So I wanted to dynamically grant users access to ASoC based on their activity in GitHub. So that was goal number one. So if a developer has committed code in, let's say, 30 days, for example, we have to map that repository that they committed code to an asset group in ASoC, and then grant that user access to that asset group. So it's a fairly straightforward idea. Using a few API calls, it's not that difficult.
And it's assuming that, we are working under the assumption that if the organization gave this user access to that repo, they should have access to the application. They shouldn't replicate that work in ASoC.
Right. So the user or the organization has already gone through the effort of granting their developers access to the correct repos in GitHub, and we don't want to do that rework. So this is how the workflow looks in a visualization. So we have a developer here. The developer's name is dev1. This developer commits code to a repo. That repo, it could be any kind of repo and you want that you care about. This user management script either runs on a schedule or runs right after a scan, right before a scan, whenever you want to run it, just to keep your users in sync. It sees that the developer has committed code, retrieves that commit data, processes it, and grants access to the users that deserve access to that asset group. And then on the flip side of that coin, if a developer has not committed code within a specified time period, say 30 days, get that commit data, see that user has not committed code in a while, and then revoke access from that asset group. So you don't have to worry about users, leaving the company and then still having access, or you have to worry about, offboarding users from the tool, because that happens in an automated fashion here.
Yeah, and for those of you who are not familiar with ASoC and the terms asset group, this is basically our access control. And asset groups is a group of assets, a group of applications that someone may or may not have access to.
Yep. And users get their roles and permissions granted to them based on asset groups. So whatever asset groups you belong to, your permissions are kind of limited to that asset group. So some of the challenges that are posed here. So how do you map the GitHub repositories to ASoC? So the way I did it is a static map. It's just a manual mapping of the GitHub URL to that repository and an asset group name in ASoC. So if you are an enterprise that has hundreds or even thousands of repositories, you're going to have to get creative on how you map those asset groups. So what I was thinking is maybe have like a naming convention where the script will look up to see if that asset group exists, given that naming convention, and if it doesn't exist, create it. So that way, even when you onboard new repositories to the list, there's no manual intervention that's to happen. It'll happen automatically. That asset group will get created, and then users will be granted access to it. All right, and if a user does not have an account in ASoC, then they must be invited first. So that's a challenge that I accomplished in my script. So you can look at that example script and see how I did that. It's a bulk API call. So one API call to ASoC can invite multiple developers at a time. So it's very efficient in that way. And then another challenge is what role do the developers get? And if you want to get creative and try to grant team leads a more privileged access to the asset group, like the ability to manipulate the applications, to run scans, to do whatever they want or whatever they have to do inside of that asset group, you'd have to pull that data from GitHub, so they don't just get the default reporting only role that I assigned them.
Cool.
All right. So some things that I needed to take care of first were I needed to get a list of repositories to monitor. I need to decide on a default developer role, which I did with the reporting only role. I needed to create a default asset group to just contain all the developers that have been created by GitHub. So that way it's kind of a container for all of those, and I can move them in and out of those asset groups depending on which repositories they're committing to.
And that to be the empty asset group, right? You just sit there and don't have access to any application.
Yeah. So if a developer has access to nothing, then they will get access to just the developer's asset group, and they would have no visibility to any scan data at all. All right. And then, like I said earlier, the method of mapping the repositories. Mm-hmm. So how did I actually do this? This is more of a pseudocode or in plain English how I accomplish the workflow. So first of all, we have to get all the commits from the repositories we're interested in, get a list of all the committers from that repository, and then note if the commit occurred within the specified time period. In my example, it's 30 days. You have to check to see if those committers have access to ASoC, and if they don't, invite them. Get the list of users from ASoC so you can map the GitHub email address with the user from ASoC, so that way we can actually manipulate what asset groups they belong to. Iterate through each of those users, and then if access is being granted, you add the asset group to the list of asset groups that belong to. And if they're getting revoked, you just remove it from the asset group membership. So it's a fairly straightforward process, and at the very end, just update the asset group membership with an API called ASoC. So it's a fairly straightforward process, and I think I can show you a example here. So let me get out of here. So this is my instance of ASoC. I have a asset group called Hello World. Right now, this Hello World asset group has no users in it, 0 users. But I do have a developer that is committing code to this asset group. So if I flip over to that user, you can see that they don't have access to anything. Under that list of applications, there's nothing here. And so what the script will do, the script will run, see that this developer has committed code, and then grant me access to the Hello World asset group. All right. So let's go ahead and run it.
So what do we see here?
All right. So going through, this is almost line for line the workflow I described. So we're going to grant users 30 days access. We've designated a default generic developer asset group, a container. We've granted them a default role. I've looked up 2 repositories, one being a repository that has no commits to it, so nothing happens. The second repository is the Hello World repository. This is the one that the commits were found, and so it sees that one user needs access granted. No one needs an invite to ASoC because they already have access. And the user that needs access was dev1. So there's dev1, and there's the asset group they're getting access to. All right, now I can switch back over to my developer and refresh, and I should see the Hello World application pop up here. So there it is. So now, through no manual effort, through complete automation, this developer would be able to see the scan results from the repository's committed code too.
Pretty cool. So how long does the script run from your perspective? I guess we didn't run it on thousands and thousands of users, but...
It depends on how many users need to have their access changed.
Mm-hmm.
So in my example, I have one user that needed to be changed. So maybe it took 500 milliseconds for that user to run. If you're doing hundreds or thousands of users, this would probably take a couple of minutes to complete.
But anyway, we don't expect thousands of changes every day. So
right. And one thing that you could do too is the way this script works is that it runs all the repositories all the time. And if you were kind of smart about this, what you would do is run this right after a scan is done. Let's say like in Jenkins or Azure DevOps, you run a scan, then you run this script for that particular repository only. That way you're only focusing on that repository directly after you run a scan to update the access after every scan is run.
And then every person that committed code to that application has access to see the results.
Right. And you're only focusing on each repository individually instead of an entire enterprise all at once.
Mm-hmm. So I guess to start with, someone will run it on their entire entire set of repos, the whole application that they want to be scanned.
Right.
But after that, only as the end of the pipeline or something of that sort.
And can you show us the script that you wrote?
So the script is written in Python. It's 175 lines long, but it has a lot of comments. So what I want this to be, when I commit it to GitHub, and Eitan, I don't think we've decided if it's going to be in the HCL GitHub or my personal GitHub, but it's going to be available somewhere. And so what I want is to make sure somebody could look at this code and read exactly what's going on. So there's a lot of comments in here.
And we will make it available, as you mentioned. In the meantime, I'll include your LinkedIn at the bottom so people can reach out to you if they want access to it, if they want to learn how to do it themselves. So cool, thanks. Let's bring you back.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep. Thanks, Cody. This looks great. I mean, I know that this specific customer that needed that was really impressed with what you showed, and basically you did it. It didn't take you much, long time to implement it. So
yeah, a couple hours, probably 2 hours to get it roughed out, and then another 2 hours to polish it up for the presentation.
Pretty awesome. And so I guess our Swagger page is getting better in time.
Yes. So the Swagger page for ASoC is great. I used a off-the-shelf library for GitHub, so I didn't have to implement any of the GitHub API calls. So that was handy.
And to be fair, the Swagger page wasn't awesome all the time. You gave a lot of feedback in the past on more examples and documentation, and we took that seriously and made that. So great.
Right.
Any other comments? So we said there is no, you don't need to run the script every day or every hour. Makes sense to use it when you need it. It will revoke users, although if you don't have your application as part of automation pipeline, you would want to probably time it and schedule running the script. But in those cases, I'm not sure that you even care about automation. You should run scans as on a daily basis, if not more than that, in most cases. So thanks you again, Cody, for coming on the show. Any last words for this session? You will come again, I'm sure.
I'm sure I'll be on again, but thanks a lot, Eitan, for having me. If anyone has any questions about any of this, shoot me a message on LinkedIn or possibly my email. I don't know if you're going to share my email, but yeah, shoot me.
I'll avoid your spams. I will just include it in the LinkedIn.
All right, that's fine. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, and happy voting. Bye-bye.